Hey guys, back again with another presentation video for you. Today we're going to talk about vulnerability assessment. Ted, what is a vulnerability assessment? You might ask. So, a vulnerability assessment is when the industry or organization in question as a whole takes a good look at their services, their applications, all of their programs, and they try to come up with a logical hierarchy of vulnerabilities and risks that exist naturally, both naturally and artificially within their environment. Um, the most proper vulnerability assessments are done methodically and systematically in that way, and with a hierarchy. Basically, they take a top-down or bottom-up approach. So they look at everything on the OSI model from the physical layer up or from the application layer down. If you're not familiar with the OSI model, it's 7 layers. Think of it almost like a scientific method for technology, right? So at your 7 layers, the first is your physical, so that's your actual cabling or your connection. The data is the next level. Level 2 is data, so that's the frames or the method of communication. The physical layer operates with bits, zeros and ones. The data link layer, layer 2, operates in frames, and it takes those zeros and ones and puts them into what is called a frame. Um, and that gets it ready for communication over the wire. From data link up, you have your networking. It's your IP addressing, your logical IP addressing, typically called a packet. So that data is then turned into a packet so that it can go from house to house. So mailbox to mailbox, hop to hop. From your network layer, you're going up to your transport layer. And from there, you're going to your session layer. Both of those are going to operate in segments, and that deals with the building up and tearing down of the communication within the application that the packet is destined for. From those layers up, from session, you have your presentation. So that's when that segment arrives. It's now going to be unloaded and prepared for your application, your viewing purposes. So if you're talking about bottom up, you're going from physical up to your application, the graphical presentation. If you're talking about top down, you're going from your graphical presentation right back down to your physical connection methodology, your wire, right? Your twisted pair. So what is the purpose of the assessment? The purpose of it is to really get a high level view of all your gaps within the organization where you basically want to get to this point where you can look at everything on a whiteboard or a blackboard or a green board, whatever kind of board you want to look at it on, and say, okay, these are really important vulnerabilities. These need to be taken care of first, depending on what kind of budget you're working with. So that's really the point of a vulnerability assessment. What does that story tell? What does the vulnerability assessment tell to your executives? What does it tell to your board of directors? So it identifies all your assets. So that's the first thing, and that's a key thing, right? Everybody should have an inventory assessment pool. Everybody needs to have a CMDB. This is polling of assets inside of your company. So equipment, software packages. You want to get everything organized and structured so you have an idea and everything's classified correctly. That way, you really understand what exists within your environment. From there, you can do a threat evaluation. You can find out what items are you not getting the best value for. Um, from there, once you establish what has the highest threat vectors, you can then do a vulnerability appraisal. So now you can put price tags on those assets based on their threat. They may have cost a certain amount, but that is sunken cost at this point because you've already paid for it. So now you need to reevaluate its value since you're looking at a list of the threats or the vulnerabilities, right? So with that vulnerability appraisal, you now put a new price tag on that asset and you can make a risk assessment. So now you can determine if this is a risk that your company can accept, if it needs to transfer externally, or if it needs to implement some kind of control to mitigate it. And that's where we talk about risk mitigation. How do we reduce that level of risk? How do we transfer it, or how do we just erase it altogether, right? In asset identification, right, and as I mentioned, you want to get a full inventory listing of your devices, your applications, systems, anything that is operationally essential to running your business and getting your mission across. You want to make sure it's documented in that asset identification list. Once that list is composed, you're going to give an integer, a numerical value to each and every asset based on its level of importance to your business. For instance, if I'm running a video company and I'm putting together graphical videos for an industry, lesson videos, then I want to make sure that my camera has the highest level of vulnerability assessment or asset identification. I'm going to give that a 5 based on your scaling. Um, Obviously, because that's a very important piece in order to have that business running at all. Now, evaluating that, once you have that number, now you can look at the threat evaluation. So you want to look at each item on that list and find out where it structurally fits into the organization, bearing in mind its level of importance, and try to determine a threat tree, come up with an idea of, okay, where are all the weak points in this device? What can happen? Can it be stolen? If it's not stored somewhere properly, can it be broken into and somebody, take this away? And that's your most important um, asset, right? So those are the things you're looking to do in your threat evaluation. In your threat evaluation, you may even come up with a threat tree. So basically, you come up with the item, ways that it's threatened, and the methods that it's threatened by. For instance, if you're looking at sensitive customer data, your company stores sensitive customer data. How can that data be threatened? Well, it can be threatened by physical access to the database. The database could be exploited, or you could have a sales endpoint breached, right? So those are 3 threat vectors. And then you can dig even further down into, okay, physically accessed, how can they be physically accessed? Maybe there is no threat there. Maybe there is no physical access to it. Maybe it's in a completely locked box somewhere up in the altitude of space and can't be accessed physically. Those are the things that you need to determine so you can cross them off your list. It's a very detailed pros and cons list. Once you've done the assessment, you can now do the appraisal, right? You want to determine where the weaknesses are in your company. So you have your threat tree, you see all your threat vectors. Now you can do a vulnerability assessment. So if you're looking again at your camera, right, and you've got it pretty secure based on your threat tree, that vulnerability assessment, now you can, label that vulnerability as low, depending on your security methods. And basically, you're seeking to answer the following question: what are our current weaknesses that attackers might exploit, or competition even? Um, Besides threat trees and doing everything by hand, there are some vulnerability scanners, some software tools that can help you deduce what your vulnerability assessment is, or what those values are for those threat vectors. There are multiple different types of scanners, again, because there's multiple methods of vulnerabilities, and there's points of weakness within multiple organizations because they rely on so many different information technology products. So we've got cloud-based scanners, host-based scanners, network-based scanners, and database based scanners. So in your cloud-based, obviously, it's going to be searching for vulnerabilities and weaknesses within your cloud-based application. So whatever scanner you get that's cloud-based, you really want to do your research on, because cloud-based technology is constantly changing. It's in the forefront of the industry right now. So 0-day attacks are much higher in those right now. So you really have to make sure you're investing in a successful vulnerability scanner if you really want to run a program that's checking on your cloud-based application. Your host-based scanners are going to basically detect vulnerabilities on your system, on the node, so your laptop, on a firewall itself, on a router or switch, on the physical device. Your network-based scanners, they're going to scan through your network infrastructure, and they're going to look for vulnerabilities in your protocols and things like that. And then database obviously is going to run on a database application. It's going to search for the weaknesses in that application. And that's just at a real high level, right? We could get deeper than that if you're really looking for a specific type of vulnerability. Based on previous conversations that we've had in other training videos, like SQL injections, right? If you're looking for those kind of vulnerabilities and coding vulnerabilities, you really have to get a different package than just having a database vulnerability assessment. And below there are some software tools and the category that they belong in. Some really good ones to call out here are Nmap. Nmap is frequently used in Linux-based systems, and it's command prompt based. So a lot of these also you really have to do your research on, again, because they could be command based and you need to know the syntax and the language that they operate in. Otherwise, you've just bought a package and you have no idea how to use it. The risk assessment comes after that, right? After you've done your vulnerability appraisal. Now you can really deduce what level of risk your company is at with that appraisal. So you've got price tags on the assets, and you've determined their threat, and you've now given them a new numerical value of monetary identification. So in the risk assessment, you're looking at the qualitative impact of each asset. So how does it, if it's impacted, that asset is impacted, how does it affect the quality of your business? Does it stop the business from running? Is it an irritant, or is it just a major issue? Major issue. Those are the things you're going to address in your risk assessment, right? So you want to approximate all the scenarios and probabilities that you can come up with for each piece of equipment. Again, keeping in mind its price value and how impactful it is to business operations. So for example, we say X vulnerability. So the threat and the vulnerability of the camera getting stolen, right, has a very critical business impact. That would be your Y variable. And then C, lowest impact, would be it's a minor disruption. So you can have those kind of levels. Those are the levels that you can assign to the impact level in your risk assessment. So you've already got your monetary value on the asset. Now you want to level out the impact. So with that, now you can do your mitigation, right? So you've got your cost appraisal on your vulnerabilities. You've now determined the level of impact. Now you have to keep in mind the probability of those that are going to occur. And you got to keep those impact levels in mind along with the price value in mind, because the ratio of those can really determine what is a more important item to mitigate. And as I mentioned before, there are really 4 ways to mitigate a risk. You can diminish the risk, so you can reduce it by implementing layers of security or doing due diligence. You can accept the risk flat out. So you can say, you know what, this has a low impact. We didn't pay much for this system. It's not going to affect our business. We'll accept the risk for now. You could transfer it. So you could outsource, you could put it, sign a contract with another vendor, or you could remove the risk altogether. Say, you know what, we're pushing this out. We're going to replace this system. It's too much of a risk. It's not going to cost us anything, and in the long run, or maybe it costs us a bunch, but it saves us money in the long run. So those are the things you're keeping in mind with your risk mitigation. And that's vulnerabilities and risk assessment within the IT organization. So you guys are already 4 chapters through a summary with for Security Plus. Thank you for listening. Love you guys and have a great day.